In the autumn of 2011, a quiet boarding school nestled in the hills of Le Chambon-Saligny, France, became the scene of one of the nation's most shocking crimes. The murder of 17-year-old Agnès Marin would not only devastate two families, but would also expose catastrophic failures within France's juvenile justice system, igniting a nationwide debate about child protection, institutional responsibility, and the handling of young offenders. Thus is the story of a preventable tragedy. Agnès Marin was born on November 26, 1997, to parents Frederick and Paula Marin. By all accounts, she was a bright, promising young girl with dreams of becoming a filmmaker. Friends described her as a good student, creative and full of potential. She represented hope, innocence, and a future that every parent dreams of for their child. In 2011, concerned about negative influences at her Paris school, including exposure to marijuana and troublesome peer groups, Agnès' parents made what they believed was a protective decision. They enrolled the daughter as a fourth-year boarder at the Collège Sivanol, a private school in Le Chambon-Saligny, in the Haute-Loire department. The school had a distinguished history, founded on principles of nonviolence and pacifism, and had once served as a refuge for Jewish children during World War II. It seemed like the perfect environment for their daughter to flourish away from the pressures of urban life. The Marins could not have imagined that this decision, made with their daughter's best interests at heart, would lead to unimaginable horror. Matthew Molinas was born on December 30, 1993, to parents Sophie and Dominique Molinas in Nangis-sur-Loge, in the Gard region of southern France. His mother, who worked as an accountant executive, while his father served as a municipal councillor. From the outside, they appeared to be a respectable middle-class family. Matthew had two younger sisters, and his parents later claimed they had taken him to numerous psychiatrists, speech therapists, and other doctors throughout his childhood, concerned about what they described as dark thoughts. According to later testimony, Molinas, who had been consuming pornographic material extensively from the age of 16. At his school, he cultivated a Gothic aesthetic, styled himself as rebellious, and bragged about being a hacker and drug user who had allegedly robbed pharmacies. He openly displayed affection with his girlfriend and frequently clashed with school authorities. His grades were poor, and he had been threatened with suspension twice in June 2011. Yet when he returned after the summer break, he appeared to be improving. But beneath this troubled exterior lurked something far more sinister. On August 2, 2010, 15-year-old Matthew committed his first known violent sexual offense. He lured a 15-year-old acquaintance into a forest near his home in Gaulle under the pretense of returning 10 euros he owed her. Once they were isolated in the woods, he produced a kitchen knife he had taken from his parents' home and used it to threaten the girl. Molinas so tied his victims to a tree and raped her using a dildo he had stolen from his parents' bedroom. The young girl was convinced she would have been killed had her mother not called her mobile phone during the attack. The call seemed to break Matthew's concentration, and the victim managed to survive the ordeal. When police arrived at the Molinas family home to arrest the son, they were reloading the car for a holiday. Officers asked the 16-year-old where the knife was. He had returned it to the kitchen drawer. When asked about a dildo, he revealed he had placed it back in his parents' room. The family's world shattered in that moment. Matthew was detained on charges of rape of a minor with the use of a weapon, a serious felony that should have kept him incarcerated pending trial. He spent 4 months in detention while being examined by mental health experts. Here is where the system's first critical failure occurred. After 4 months, the experts who examined Matthew certified him as redeemable or recoverable, a determination that would prove tragically, catastrophically wrong. Based on this assessment, on November 26, 2010, exactly 1 year before what would have been Agnès Marin's 14th birthday, a judge released Matthew on judicial supervision. The conditions of his release required him to undergo psychotherapy for his psychological problems and drug use, attend school, Leesburger region, love as a boarder at a new school. The Molinas family applied to 17 different schools. Only one accepted him, the college Savannah in Le Chambon-Savignon. The decision to place Matthew at College Savannah would become the subject of intense scrutiny and criticism. Multiple parties were aware of varying degrees of information about Matthew's criminal background, yet proper communication and safeguarding protocols were not followed. The prosecution later argued that school administrators were aware Matthew had been in prison on a rape charge. However, the school maintained they were not informed of the specific reason for his detention and judicial supervision. Matthew's father, Dominic, admitted at trial that he had alluded to the fact that his son was under investigation for a sexual offense. More damningly, Agnes's father, Frederick Marin, stated that the school was aware Matthew had problems involving sexual acts of aggression. At trial, the director of the school ultimately admitted that he had known about Matthew's background. Matthew's judicial supervisor later claimed to feel constrained by the presumption of innocence and professional ethics, preventing him from fully disclosing the nature of Matthew's previous offense. Meanwhile, when Matthew was suspended for viewing pornography on a school computer, administrators failed to inform his judicial supervisor of this troubling behavior, a violation that might have triggered a review of his supervised release. In essence, a violent sexual offender was placed in a co-educational boarding school, filled with vulnerable young people, but no adequate monitoring or protection systems in place. On Wednesday, November 16, 2011, Matthew, then 17 years old and approaching his 18th birthday, approached 13-year-old Agnès Marin with a proposition. He told her he wanted to search for hallucinogenic mushrooms in the woods near a school and asked if she would accompany him. For reasons known only to her, Agnès agreed. It was a trap. Matthew had prepared meticulously for what was to come. He had already brought gasoline to the forest location in advance. According to his later confession, his plan was deliberate and calculated. He would rape Agnès to humiliate her, kill her so she could not accuse him of the assault, and burn her body to destroy evidence. Once they were deep in the forest, far from help, Matthew bound Agnes's hands behind her back and gagged her with a keffiyeh scarf. What followed was an attack of extreme brutality. He raped her, then stabbed her 17 times. Finally, he used the gasoline he had pre-positioned to set her body on fire. Matthew later described the attack with chilling detachment during his trial, discussing the details of restraints, penetrations, bites, stabbings, and headlocks as if describing a failed experiment. He had critiqued his own performance, noting that keffiyehs and scarves were insufficient for gagging and that he would need to think of something else for future attacks, a statement that revealed he had been planning to kill again. When Agnès failed to return to the school, alarm bells rang immediately. A search was launched for the missing girl, and 2 days later, on November 18, 2011, her burned body was discovered in the forest. After just a few hours in police custody, Matthew confessed to the crime. He recounted the details in what witnesses described as a matter-of-fact manner, displaying what his victim's grandmother, Solane Marin, would later characterize as an astonishing indifference and complete lack of empathy. It was an task, she said of his testimony. The way he talked about it, without any empathy, it was horrifying. During interrogation, Matthew also discussed his previous attack in August 2010, stating, "I was set to torture, rape, and kill her, but I lacked experience. I didn't handle it very well, so I ended up untying her." His first victim had survived only because of his inexperience and her mother's timely phone call, not because of any mercy or change of heart. Agnès Marin was buried in Paris on November 26, 2011, the day that would have been her 14th birthday. The tragic symbolism of this timing was not lost on anyone. A young girl who should have been celebrating with friends and family, looking forward to her teenage years, and pursuing her dream of filmmaking, was instead being laid to rest. The loss devastated the Marin family. They had sent their daughter to what they believed was a safe haven, only to have her murdered by a known sexual predator who never should have been there. When news of Agnès' murder and Matthew's previous offense became public, France erupted in outrage. The case became a lightning rod for public debate about juvenile justice, institutional failures, and the protection of children. Critics attacked the decision from multiple angles. Why was a violent sexual offender released after only 4 months? How could mental health experts have deemed him redeemable? Why was he placed in a co-educational boarding school? Why wasn't information about his offense properly shared with the school? Why didn't the school inform his judicial supervisor when he was caught doing pornography? Why wasn't there more robust monitoring of his activities? The public demanded answers, and the questions exposed a system riddled with communication breakdowns, bureaucratic constraints, and a catastrophic failure to prioritize child safety over a young offender's presumption of innocence and rehabilitation prospects. In late November 2011, responding to the public outcry, Prime Minister François Fillon announced sweeping reforms. The new government rules mandated that juveniles accused of the most serious offenses would be kept in detention pending trial. Schools receiving such juveniles under judicial supervision would be given full information about alleged offenses prior to admission. Psychological assessment procedures for accused offenders would be reviewed and improved. The case had forced France to confront uncomfortable truths about its juvenile justice system, and Agnès Marin had become a symbol of how catastrophically wrong things could go when systems designed to protect children failed. Matthew's trial before the Juvenile Assize Court began on June 18, 2013. The proceedings were held largely in camera, close to the public, at the request of his first victim, who wished to protect her privacy. This decision was made against the wishes of the Marin family, who wanted the trial to be public, so the full extent of the institutional failures could be exposed. During the trial, prosecutors painted a devastating picture of institutional negligence. The public prosecutor criticized the numerous institutional failings that had enabled the murder, laying bare the cascade of poor decisions and communication failures that had put Agnès in harm's way. The court heard chilling testimony about Matthew's behavior and mindset. Experts described his extensive consumption of pornography, his lack of empathy, and his calculated planning of the attack. His behavior of the colleague Savino was also examined. The Gothic styling, the bragging about criminal activities, the public displays with his girlfriend, the suspension for viewing pornography on school computers. These were all red flags that should have been prompted greater scrutiny and production measures. Matthew himself provided testimony that shocked the courtroom. His first hearing was marked by an astonishing indifference to his crimes, as if he were somehow disconnected from the horror he had inflicted. His lawyers advised him to appear more human in subsequent appearances, but the damage was done. When he spoke of the attacks, he did so with clinical detachment, discussing techniques and critiquing his own performance rather than expressing genuine remorse for his victims. On June 28, 2013, the court delivered its verdict for both the August 2010 rape and the rape and murder of Agnès Marin. Matthew were sentenced to life imprisonment. This was an unprecedented and historic sentence. Matthew became only the second juvenile offender in French history to receive a life sentence. The first, Patrick Doys, had been sentenced in 1989 for the murder of 2 children. Though Douls was subsequently exonerated and released in 2002 after DNA evidence proved his innocence. The prosecutor had asked the jury not to grant Matthew the benefit of minority, the principle that juvenile offenders should receive more lenient sentences than adults due to their age and capacity for rehabilitation. Instead, the prosecution requested a 30-year sentence and civil commitment, taking into account both the severity of his crimes and his documented mental health problems. The jury exceeded even this harsh recommendation, imposing life imprisonment, the maximum sentence under French law. Matthew's lawyers immediately announced their intention to appeal. The appeal hearing took place on October 10, 2014, at the Rheims Court of Appeals. On the first day of proceedings, the presiding officer asked Matthew why he had appealed his sentence. His response was telling, "I accept life imprisonment, but I would like compulsory K." The statement revealed much about Matthew and his family's perspective. They weren't seeking to overturn his guilt, who even substantially reduced his sentence. They wanted to ensure he would receive mandatory psychiatric treatment. His parents, Sophie and Dominique, viewed this as crucial both for their son's mental health and for public safety. As his father later explained, "This guarantees us that the state will watch over when he gets out. The responsibility will not be incumbent upon us, neither us nor his younger sisters." After deliberating for 6 hours, the appeals court confirmed Matthew's life imprisonment sentence. This time, however, they added a lifelong K order, mandating that he receives compulsory psychiatric treatment. This addition ended any possibility of revision of the rulings on the facts of the case. Under French law, juveniles sentenced to life imprisonment are eligible for parole after 18 years. The lifelong K order meant that if Matthew were ever released, he would remain under state supervision and be required to continue psychiatric treatment indefinitely. The Molinas family considered this a partial victory. Their son had admitted his guilt and would remain imprisoned, but the state would bear responsibility for monitoring and treating him if he were ever released. As Dominique Molinas told his son, "We got what we wanted, compulsory K." While one might expect the conclusion of legal proceedings to bring closure, the aftermath of Agnès Marin's murder continued to ripple through the lives of everyone connected to the case. For the Marin family, there could be no closure, no return to normalcy. They had lost a daughter in the most horrific circumstances imaginable, and they had to live with the knowledge that her death had been preventable. Agnès' grandmother, Solène Marin, captured the family's anguish when she said, "Agnès was put on a slow, runaway train towards death. The collective failure is impressive." The Marin family also faced the frustration of having the trial conducted largely in camera, preventing full public scrutiny of the institutional failures that had cost a daughter her life. While the reforms announced by Prime Minister Finland might prevent future tragedies, nothing could bring Agnès back. For the Molinas family, their lives were equally shattered, though in a different way. Sophie and Dominique Molinas became the parents of a monster, forever associated with one of France's most notorious crimes. For 3 years after the murder, they avoided all media contact, with the lawyer repeatedly stating, out of respect for the victims, his parents don't wish to speak publicly. In the small house at the end of a narrow road in this southern French town, they lived with shame, isolation, and grief. These formerly outgoing people now kept their heads down, moved quickly, and closed doors behind them. They asked themselves impossible questions. How had they not seen the signs? How had their efforts to be good people and seek help for their son come to nothing? According to later accounts, the Molinas family felt haunted by their son's victim. They struggled with the knowledge that their son, the child they had raised, taken to doctors, tried to help, had committed unspeakable acts. Only Matthew's parents, sisters, and grandparents visited him in prison. The rest of the community had turned away. In 2016, 5 years after the murder, Sophie and Dominique Molinas made the controversial decision to publish a book titled Parents of Perpetuity, Parents for Life. The book detailed their experience as the parents of a murderer, their attempts to understand how their son had become capable of such violence, and their ongoing struggle with shame and grief. The Marin family was outraged by the publication. They viewed it as a fresh violation, an attempt by Matthew's parents to profit from Ghana sympathy after their son had destroyed their daughter's life. The book reignited public interest in the case and reopened wounds that had never truly healed. In interviews promoting the book, the Molinas couple revealed disturbing details. The son still showed no remorse for his crimes, despite years of psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Despite his life imprisonment, Matthew remained emotionally disconnected from the horror he had inflicted on Agnès Marin and his first victim. The murder of Agnès Marin left an indelible mark on France's approach to juvenile justice and institutional safeguarding. The reforms announced by Prime Minister Fillon in November 2011 represented a significant shift toward prioritizing public safety and victim protection over the rehabilitation prospects of the most dangerous young offenders. The case also had devastating consequences for the College Savonneau itself. The school, founded on principles of nonviolence and pacifism, and with a proud history of sheltering Jewish children during World War II, found itself at the center of a national scandal. The terrible irony that a school dedicated to peace and protection should be the site of such violence was not lost on observers. Enrollment at the school declined sharply after the murder, as parents lost confidence in the institution's ability to protect their children. The school faced criticism for its lax admission standards, its failure to properly investigate and monitor Matthew, and its inadequate response to warning signs of his dangerous behavior. The combination of financial difficulties, reputational damage, and declining enrollment would ultimately prove fatal to the institution. The College Savonneau eventually closed, a casualty of the very violence its founders had sought to oppose. The murder of Agnès Marin raises profound and troubling questions that extend far beyond one tragic case. How do we balance rehabilitation with public safety? The French juvenile justice system, like many around the world, is built on the principle that young offenders have greater capacity for change and should be given opportunities for rehabilitation. But what happens when an offender poses such a clear danger? Death rehabilitation becomes a secondary concern. Matthew's case suggests a system titled Too Far Toward Rehabilitation, ignoring obvious warning signs that he posed an imminent threat. What information should be shared, and with whom? Matthew's judicial supervisor felt constrained by professional ethics and the presumption of innocence from sharing full details of his offense with the school. But how can an institution protect its students if it doesn't have complete information about the risks? The reforms requiring full disclosure to school represent a shift toward transparency, but they also raise concerns about privacy and the potential for discrimination against young offenders. How do we assess risk? The mental health experts who deemed Matthew redeemable after just 4 months were catastrophically wrong. What methods did they use? What signs did they miss? How can psychological assessment be improved to better identify truly dangerous individuals? These questions remain urgent, as similar assessments continue to determine who is released and who remains detained. What is the role of family and community supervision? Matthew's parents took him to numerous mental health professionals, yet they also minimized the severity of his first rape, attributing it to drinking and cannabis use. They returned a knife and a dildo to their home after police identified them as weapons in a violent sexual assault. How much responsibility do parents pay for monitoring and controlling a violent teenage offender living in their home? When does a juvenile become unsalvageable? It's a harsh question, but Matthew himself suggested an answer with his chilling testimony about lacking experience in his first attack and planning improvements for future victims. Some individuals, even at a young age, may pose such danger, its society's primary obligation must be to protect potential victims rather than rehabilitate to offenders. The murder of Agnès Marin stands as one of the most tragic and preventable crimes in modern French history. A 13-year-old girl who dreams of becoming a filmmaker, sent by loving parents to what they believed was a safe environment, was raped and murdered by a fellow student who never should have been there. The case exposed catastrophic failures at every level. Mental health experts who misjudged a violent sexual predator as irredeemable. A judicial system that prioritized an offender's rehabilitation prospects over public safety. A school that either didn't know or didn't act on information about a dangerous student. A supervision system that failed to adequately monitor a violent offender in a vulnerable setting. Communication breakdowns between judicial, educational, and mental health authorities. Agnès Marin paid for these failures with her life. She died terrified and alone in a forest, her body burned by a predator who had calculated every detail of her murder. She never got to turn 14, never got to pursue her dream of filmmaking, never got to experience the life her parents had hoped to give her. Matthew, now in his 30s, remains imprisoned. He has shown no genuine remorse for his crimes and, according to his own parents, feels no connection to the horror he inflicted. He is eligible for parole in 2029, though whether he will be released remains to be seen. The lifelong key order ensures that if he is ever freed, he will remain under state supervision and compulsory psychiatric treatment. But legal sentences and institutional reforms cannot undo what was done. They cannot bring Agnès Marin back to her grieving family. They cannot erase the trauma experienced by Matthew's first victim, who survived only by chance. They cannot fully restore public confidence in systems designed to protect children. The murder of Agnès Marin reminds us that justice systems are only as strong as the weakest link, that institutional failures have real human costs, and that the safety of children must be the paramount concern above bureaucratic constraints, professional ethics, and even principles of rehabilitation and redemption. In the end, Agnès Marin became a symbol, a reminder of what we lose when systems fail, when warning signs are ignored, when information isn't shared, when the wrong priorities take precedence. Her name is now inseparable from the reforms that followed her death, reforms designed to ensure that no other child suffers her fate. For Frederick and Polo Marin, November 26th will forever be a day of unbearable pain. The birthday the daughter never reached, the funeral that should never have happened. For France, the case remains a national shame, a reminder of how badly things can go wrong when institutions meant to protect children fail in their most basic duty. Agnès Marin was 13 years old. She wanted to be a filmmaker. She deserved to live.